The night was silent in a way that made every breath feel too loud. Somewhere deep inside occupied Europe, beneath a sky choked with low clouds and the smell of snow, a war was being fought without gunfire. It was a war of symbols, numbers, and secrets, one where a single machine could decide the fate of millions. In Berlin, Adolf Hitler slept with absolute confidence. Every order he issued, every movement of his armies, every plan to crush his enemies traveled across Europe wrapped inside layers of mathematical protection. The Germans called it Enigma. To them, it was flawless, unbreakable, eternal. To the Allies, it was a locked door behind which the future of the war was hiding. And somewhere in the darkness, a small group of men were risking everything to steal the key. If they failed, history would never know their names. If they succeeded, history itself would change. The Enigma machine was not large. It weighed less than a typewriter, sat neatly inside a wooden box, and looked harmless to the untrained eye. But inside that box lived a complexity so vast that even the brightest minds of the 1930s believed it could not be defeated. Each key press scrambled a letter through rotating wheels, electrical pathways, and plugboard connections, creating a cipher that changed every single time a message was sent. By conservative estimates, the number of possible combinations exceeded 150 million. To the German High Command, this meant one thing: absolute secrecy. Orders traveled from Berlin to tanks in France, submarines in the Atlantic, and divisions on the Eastern Front without fear of interception. German officers spoke freely over radio, confident that even if the messages were captured, they would remain unread forever. That confidence was their greatest weakness. Across the English Channel, inside the quiet countryside of Buckinghamshire, stood a collection of unremarkable buildings known as Bletchley Park. There, mathematicians, linguists, chess champions, engineers, and cryptographers worked around the clock in near secrecy. Among them was Alan Turing, a brilliant but socially awkward mathematician whose mind operated at a speed few could comprehend. Alongside him were Polish codebreakers, veterans of a silent war against Enigma that had begun years before the first German tank rolled into Poland. The Poles had done what the Germans thought impossible. They had cracked early versions of Enigma, not completely, not permanently, but enough to understand its logic. In the summer of 1939, just weeks before Germany invaded, Polish intelligence made a desperate decision. They shared everything with Britain and France: replicas of Enigma machines, notes, theories, and hard-earned insights. It was an act of quiet heroism. But by the time the war began, Germany had already improved Enigma. More rotors, more plugboard connections, more complexity. The old solutions no longer worked. Bletchley Park was racing against time, building massive electromechanical devices called bombs to guess daily keys before the information became useless. Yet even with all their genius, they faced a terrifying truth. Without a real Enigma machine, without its current settings, manuals, and operating procedures, their work might never be fast enough. They didn't just need intelligence, they needed theft. The German military guarded Enigma machines as closely as weapons. They were never to be captured intact. Operators were trained to destroy them at the first sign of danger, smashing rotors, burning codebooks, even throwing machines into the sea. The penalty for failing to do so was death. This made the idea of stealing one almost suicidal. Almost. By 1940, German forces occupied vast stretches of Europe, including Poland. Beneath the visible layer of occupation, checkpoints, patrols, flags, another world existed. Resistance networks formed in cellars, forests, and abandoned buildings. Couriers memorized messages instead of writing them down. Radios transmitted in short bursts before German direction-finding vans could triangulate their position.
It was through these shadows that Allied intelligence learned something extraordinary. In a former Polish military facility, now repurposed by the German army, Enigma machines were being stored and serviced. Not one, several, along with manuals, rotor logs, and daily key sheets. The location was heavily guarded, surrounded by fences, and monitored day and night. It sat near a rail line, chosen for convenience and security. German soldiers rotated shifts with mechanical precision. On paper, the mission was impossible, but wars are not won on paper. The planning began in whispers. British intelligence, working with Polish resistance leaders, debated every detail. They could not send a large force; it would draw attention and trigger destruction protocols. They could not rely solely on locals; the Germans would suspect betrayal immediately after. The solution was a hybrid team. A handful of Allied operatives trained in sabotage and infiltration, a small number of Polish resistance fighters who knew the terrain, the routines, the language, no more than a dozen men in total. Each man was chosen not just for skill, but for temperament. Panic would be fatal. Hesitation would be fatal. Mercy might be fatal. They trained for weeks in mock facilities, rehearsing every step until movements became instinct. They memorized guard rotations, blind spots, alarm systems. They learned how to disable sentries silently, how to open crates without splintering wood, how to recognize the correct Enigma variants among decoys. They were not told the full importance of the mission, only that failure would cost lives on a scale none of them could imagine. The night of the operation arrived without ceremony. Snow had begun to fall, softening footsteps and muffling sound. Clouds swallowed the moon, plunging the countryside into near-total darkness. German guards stamped their feet to stay warm, rifles slung over heavy coats. The team moved low and slow, emerging from the tree line like ghosts. Each man carried only what was essential: wire cutters, pistols with suppressors, small charges, and compact radios set to prearranged frequencies. At the perimeter fence, a single light flickered. 2 guards walked their route, unaware that their patterns had been memorized down to the second. When the moment came, it was swift. One guard never made a sound. The other had time only to inhale. The fence was cut and resealed behind them, leaving no obvious sign of intrusion. Inside the compound, the air smelled of oil, metal, and cold stone. Somewhere inside the building, a clock ticked loudly enough to feel like thunder. They moved room by room, counting breaths, timing heartbeats. Every second stretched, every shadow looked alive. In a locked storage room beneath the main structure, they found what they were looking for. Wooden crates, stenciled markings, German serial numbers. Inside one crate sat an Enigma machine, its keys untouched, rotors neatly arranged. Another crate held documents, maintenance instructions, wiring diagrams, operational manuals stamped Geheime Reichwache, top secret state matter. For a moment, no one spoke. They knew instinctively that they were holding history. But history does not care about awe, it cares about time. The extraction had to be flawless. The machines were heavy, awkward, and fragile. Any delay increased the chance of discovery. German patrols could change routes, a radio check could be ordered, a single shout could bring the entire compound down on them. They repacked the crates, replacing them with weighted decoys prepared in advance. If discovered later, the delay might buy hours or days before Germany realized what had been lost. As they prepared to leave, footsteps echoed above. Voices. German voices. A patrol had arrived early. The team froze, pressed against stone walls, hearts hammering so loudly they feared it could be heard. Boots descended the stairs. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness, sweeping inches from where one man stood. A question was asked. Another answered. A laugh. The patrol turned away. Only when the sound faded did anyone breathe again. The escape was faster than the entry. Snow covered their tracks, the forest swallowed them whole. Within hours, the crates were hidden in a safe house, then moved again and again, following a chain of couriers and false identities. From there, the machines began a journey across occupied Europe, through neutral countries, across dangerous borders, and finally, by sea, to Britain. When the crates arrived at Bletchley Park, they were opened in silence. Alan Turing stood among the men who unpacked them. He didn't say anything at first. He didn't need to. His hands trembled as he examined the rotors, the wiring, the plugboard layout. This was not theory. This was truth. For the first time, the Allies were not guessing what Enigma might be. They were seeing what it was. And with that knowledge, the war itself began to change, quietly, invisibly, one decoded message at a time. But the men who stole the machine would never see that change. Some would be captured months later. Some would be executed. Some would vanish into the fog of war, their names erased from records, their sacrifices buried under layers of secrecy that would last for decades. The world would celebrate generals and battles. Very few would ever know that one of the greatest victories of World War II happened in silence, in the dark, when a handful of men chose to steal a box instead of firing a gun. And this was only the beginning. When the stolen Enigma machines reached Britain, they did not arrive with fanfare or celebration. There were no cheers, no speeches, no medals pinned to uniforms. Instead, the crates were unloaded at night, under rain-soaked skies, transported by unmarked trucks driven by men who asked no questions. Even the guards at the gate of Bletchley Park were not told what was inside. Secrecy was the final layer of protection. Inside one of the huts, the machines were placed on plain wooden tables. For a long moment, no one touched them, not because they feared them, but because everyone in that room understood what they represented. Entire fleets, cities, and armies had moved under the protection of these machines. Thousands of Allied sailors had died because of the messages typed on these keys. Now the balance had shifted. Alan Turing leaned forward and removed the top panel of one machine. He examined the rotors slowly, carefully, as if the device might react to sudden movement. He noted the wear on the metal, the slight discoloration where fingers had pressed the same keys again and again. This was not a laboratory model. This was a battlefield machine. It had carried real orders, real deaths. And it was finally speaking, if only someone could learn how to listen fast enough. The first discovery was both thrilling and terrifying. The internal wiring differed slightly from what British analysts had assumed. Not enough to make their previous work useless, but enough to explain why so many decryptions had failed by minutes or hours. Those minutes mattered. Convoys had been rerouted too late. Air raids had missed targets by narrow margins. Now the reason was clear. More importantly, the team discovered operating procedures that no captured radio message could reveal. How German operators chose message keys, how often rotors were changed, which shortcuts were officially forbidden but unofficially common. Human habits were as important as mathematics. With the real machines in front of them, Bletchley Park transformed overnight. New bomb settings were designed. Existing ones were modified. The machines grew louder, faster, more relentless. Rows of rotating drums spun day and night, driven by the urgency of war. Yet Enigma was not a single enemy. It evolved. The German Navy, more paranoid than the Army or Air Force, used a more complex version of Enigma, with additional rotors. Their communications controlled U-boat wolf packs stalking the Atlantic, sinking Allied ships faster than they could be replaced. Britain was losing the shipping war. Food, fuel, ammunition, everything depended on those sea lanes. Breaking naval enigma was the ultimate prize, and it remained just out of reach. While codebreakers worked in England, the consequences of the theft rippled across occupied Europe. German counterintelligence noticed small inconsistencies, crates that seemed heavier than before, logs that didn't match inventories perfectly. At first, they assumed clerical errors, then negligence, then sabotage. Investigations began quietly. Gestapo officers questioned guards, patrol schedules were changed, background checks intensified. Polish villages near the facility were searched repeatedly. Men disappeared. Some returned broken. Some never returned at all. The resistance paid the price. One of the Polish fighters who had helped steal the machine was arrested weeks later during an unrelated sweep. He was beaten for days, accused of crimes he had not committed, until finally he confessed to something vague enough to satisfy his interrogators, but specific enough to seal his fate. He was executed at dawn. No one at Bletchley Park ever learned his name. Back in Britain, the first true success arrived without warning. A decrypted message revealed the planned movement of a German convoy in the North Atlantic. The information was fresh, hours old, not days. British Naval Command hesitated. Acting on decrypted intelligence was dangerous. If they responded too precisely, the Germans might suspect Enigma had been compromised. They chose a compromise. A patrol aircraft was sent randomly into the area. It spotted the convoy and radioed its position. Allied ships intercepted, sinking several U-boats. The official explanation cited luck. The sailors knew better. From that moment on, ultra-intelligence, information derived from Enigma decrypts, became one of the most closely guarded secrets of the war. Even commanders receiving it were often told it came from reliable sources, not code-breaking. Lives were saved by decisions whose true origin remained hidden. But Enigma was not defeated once and for all. The Germans changed keys daily, sometimes twice daily. New procedures were introduced, security reminders were issued, operators were warned not to reuse phrases, not to take shortcuts, not to trust routine. And yet, they were human. A tired operator at 3 in the morning might choose a familiar setting. A naval officer under pressure might repeat yesterday's message format. A weather report might begin with the same words day after day. Each small mistake was a crack in the armor. The machines stolen from Poland allowed Bletchley Park to exploit those cracks faster than ever before. Instead of guessing blindly, codebreakers could narrow possibilities, discard wrong paths, and reach solutions while the information was still actionable. Still, there was a problem that haunted them. They were always behind. To be useful, a message had to be decrypted before the event it described occurred. A warning about an air raid was worthless after the bombs fell. A report on troop movement meant nothing once the troops arrived. Speed was everything. That urgency drove innovation at a pace rarely seen before or since. New bombs were built in secret factories. Women recruited from across Britain, many barely out of school, were trained to operate complex machines under intense pressure. They worked in shifts, sworn to secrecy, forbidden from even telling their families what they did. Many never knew the full importance of their work. They only knew that if they slowed down, men would die. Meanwhile, the German High Command remained confident. Reports of Allied successes were attributed to spies, air recon, or coincidence. Enigma remained, in their minds, mathematically invincible. Some officers raised concerns. They were dismissed. One German cryptographer even warned that procedural mistakes could weaken the system. His report was ignored. Arrogance is often louder than reason. As 1941 turned into 1942, the war expanded. The United States entered the conflict after Pearl Harbor, bringing immense industrial power and fresh urgency. American cryptographers joined the effort, integrating their resources with British operations. The Atlantic battle intensified. And then, fate intervened again. A German U-boat was damaged during an engagement and forced to surface. Its crew attempted to destroy their Enigma machine, but in the chaos, failed to do so completely. British sailors boarded the sinking submarine and recovered not just the machine, but current code books. It was a second miracle. Combined with the stolen machines from Poland, this captured naval enigma for critical periods. Convoy routes were adjusted, ambushes were avoided, losses dropped dramatically. Hitler never understood why. He blamed commanders, he blamed weather, he blamed fate. He never blamed Enigma. The men who had risked everything in occupied Poland never lived to see how decisive their mission became. Their actions shortened the war by years, according to post-war estimates. Millions of lives, soldiers and civilians alike, were saved because messages were read instead of guessed. But secrecy persisted. After the war,
Enigma's story remained classified. Veterans of Bletchley Park were forbidden from speaking. Families never learned what their sons and daughters had done. The resistance fighters were buried without recognition. It would take decades before the truth emerged. And when it did, the world would finally understand that World War II was not won only with tanks and bombs, but with courage in silence, brilliance in shadows, and one stolen machine that the Nazis believed could never betray them. Yet even this was not the end of Enigma's legacy, because the methods born in that quiet war would shape intelligence, computing, and modern cryptography forever. And the echoes of that secret mission still resonate today. By the middle of 1942, the war had reached a strange turning point. On the surface, Germany still appeared unstoppable. Its armies occupied much of Europe. Its submarines prowled the Atlantic. Its radio networks pulsed day and night with commands issued from Berlin, Paris, Rome, and the Eastern Front. But beneath that surface, something invisible was happening. The Allies were listening. Every intercepted Enigma message arrived at Bletchley Park as a stream of meaningless letters, chaotic, cold, and indifferent. Yet, to the cryptanalysts who stared at those pages, the chaos was beginning to feel familiar. Patterns emerged. Structures repeated themselves. The machine, once thought unbreakable, now behaved like an enemy whose habits were slowly being learned. This was not victory. It was a race. Each morning began with a reset. At midnight, German time, Enigma's daily keys changed. New rotor orders, new ring settings, new plug board connections. Whatever progress had been made the previous day vanished instantly. The code breakers had hours, sometimes less, to reconstruct the key before the information expired. Many days they failed. Those failures haunted them. A decrypted message that arrived too late was worse than no message at all. It meant knowing that a convoy would be attacked, that a city would be bombed, that soldiers would walk into an ambush, and being powerless to stop it. The burden was immense. Some analysts broke under the pressure. Others withdrew into themselves, functioning only through routine. A few thrived, driven by the relentless logic of the problem and the quiet knowledge that lives depended on their speed. Alan Turing rarely spoke about that burden, but it showed in other ways. He worked obsessively, barely sleeping,
scribbling equations at all hours. He trusted machines more than people, believing that mechanical logic, if pushed far enough, could outpace human error. That belief led to a revolution. The bombs, once experimental, became central to the war effort. They were improved relentlessly: faster drums, more reliable relays, refined logical shortcuts known as menus. These machines did not break Enigma outright. Instead, they eliminated impossibilities at a speed no human could match, narrowing millions of combinations down to a handful worth testing. The stolen Enigma machines from Poland played a crucial role here. They allowed engineers to test assumptions directly, to simulate German procedures accurately, and to design bombs that mirrored real-world behavior rather than theoretical models. Reality mattered. So did mistakes. German operators, despite repeated warnings, continued to make them. Weather reports began with predictable phrases. Messages ended with polite formalities. Some units reused keys when equipment malfunctioned. Others wrote messages so long that statistical patterns emerged despite the encryption. Each error was a gift, but gifts came at a cost. As Allied successes mounted, German suspicion deepened, not toward Enigma itself, but to everyone else. Intelligence officers hunted for spies that did not exist. Commanders accused subordinates of incompetence. Internal trust eroded. Ironically, this paranoia sometimes helped the Allies. To hide the fact that Enigma had been broken, British intelligence occasionally allowed attacks to proceed unchallenged. Ships sailed into danger. Cities were bombed. People died not because the Allies didn't know, but because revealing that knowledge would expose the secret. These decisions were among the hardest made during the war. One such decision involved a city whose name would later become synonymous with destruction. Intelligence revealed a massive air raid planned against it. The information was clear, precise, undeniable. Churchill was informed. He made his choice. The raid went ahead. After the war, some would accuse him of sacrificing civilians for secrecy. Others would argue that exposing Enigma could have cost far more lives in the long run. History offers no verdict that satisfies everyone, only consequences. By late 1942, the Atlantic battle reached a critical phase. German U-boats were sinking ships at an alarming rate. Supplies meant for Britain and the Soviet Union lay at the bottom of the ocean. Starvation loomed as a real possibility. Breaking naval Enigma consistently became the highest priority. The captured codebooks from the damaged U-boat had helped, but only temporarily. German naval keys changed frequently and unpredictably. Without fresh material, the Allies risked losing their advantage. That's when a new kind of mission emerged. Instead of stealing machines from land facilities, Allied forces began to target ships and submarines, not to sink them, but to board them. These were operations of extreme danger. A submarine crew trained to destroy Enigma equipment within seconds. Boarding parties had moments, sometimes less, to seize machines and documents before the vessel sank or self-destructed. The risks were staggering. In one operation, a boarding team leapt onto a sinking U-boat in heavy seas. Water flooded the deck, ammunition cooked off below. The smell of fuel and burning metal filled the air. Inside the conning tower, they found an Enigma machine partially mashed, its rotor scattered. They grabbed everything they could carry. Minutes later, the submarine slipped beneath the waves. Those minutes changed the war. Back at Bletchley Park, the new material filled gaps that mathematics alone could not. It revealed updated procedures, new rotor combinations, and subtle changes in naval protocol. Once again, the Allies were inside the enemy's mind. But Enigma's greatest impact was still ahead. As preparations for a massive invasion of occupied Europe began, secrecy became paramount. If the Germans learned when and where the Allies planned to strike, the invasion would fail catastrophically. Every detail mattered. Enigma decrypts revealed German expectations, troop deployments, and defensive preparations. They showed where the enemy was confident and where it was blind. This intelligence shaped one of the greatest deceptions in military history. Fake armies were created on paper and radio. Dummy tanks and aircraft were placed in fields. Entire networks of false communications were transmitted, carefully encrypted using compromised systems so that German intelligence would believe them. The irony was exquisite. The Germans trusted Enigma so completely that they trusted lies sent through it. As the months passed, Enigma's role expanded beyond tactics into strategy. It influenced where bombers flew, where armies advanced, and where resources were allocated. It shortened battles before they began. It turned potential disasters into narrow escapes. Yet the people responsible remained anonymous. At Bletchley Park, there were no medals on desks, no public praise. Workers signed the Official Secrets Act and kept silent even after the war ended. Some went to their graves without ever telling their spouses what they had done. The Polish resistance fighters who made the original theft possible received even less. Many died without knowing that their actions had changed history. Their country, liberated from Nazi occupation, soon fell under Soviet control. Recognition was replaced by suspicion. Silence followed them into peacetime. Only decades later would historians piece together the full story. They would discover that the Enigma machine, once the symbol of Nazi technological superiority, had been undermined not by brute force, but by courage, cooperation, and intellect across borders. A stolen machine, a hidden park, a war fought in whispers, and a victory achieved long before the final surrender was signed. But the legacy of that victory did not end in 1945. It became the foundation of the modern world.
By 1943, the war had entered a phase where outcomes were decided less by sudden breakthroughs and more by endurance. Factories roared day and night. Convoys crossed oceans in endless lines. Soldiers dug in, advanced, retreated, and advanced again. On the surface, it appeared to be a contest of manpower and machines, but beneath that surface, the war was being shaped by information. Every morning at Bletchley Park began with urgency. Couriers arrived with fresh intercepts, pages filled with dense strings of letters that meant nothing until they meant everything. Analysts pinned them to boards, grouped them by network and call sign, and waited for the bombs to speak. Sometimes they did. Sometimes they stayed silent. On days when the machines delivered results quickly, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Phones rang. Runners moved between huts. Senior officers were briefed in guarded language. Orders were adjusted. Ships changed course. Bombers were retasked. On days when the machines failed, the silence felt heavier than any explosion. The people working there learned to live with that uncertainty. They celebrated quietly, mourned privately, and returned to work without pause. The war did not allow reflection. The Enigma machine, stolen years earlier, was still in use, not for decryption directly, but as reference points. Engineers studied wear patterns, component tolerances, and failure modes. They learned how the machines behaved after months of use, how rotors loosened slightly, how contacts degraded, how that degradation influenced encryption in tiny but measurable ways. It was a level of detail no theoretical model could capture. These insights fed directly into new cryptanalytic techniques. Analysts refined cribs, educated guesses about message content, using operational knowledge gained from decrypted traffic.
They learned which units reported at fixed times, which commands followed rigid formats, and which officers preferred verbose language. War creates routine. Routine creates vulnerability. At the same time, German efforts to strengthen Enigma continued. New rotors were introduced. Security bulletins reminded operators of proper procedure. Naval communications became increasingly complex. Some commanders even suggested abandoning radio altogether in favor of couriers. But radio was too useful, too fast, too modern, and so Enigma remained. One of the most critical periods came during the Allied bombing campaign over Europe. Strategic bombers flew deep into enemy territory, targeting factories, rail yards, and fuel depots. Losses were severe. Crews faced flak, fighters, and navigation errors that could turn a mission fatal. Enigma decrypts revealed German air defense tactics in near real time. They showed where night fighters were concentrated, when radar stations were active, and how interception zones shifted. This intelligence saved lives. Routes were adjusted, timing was altered, decoy raids were launched to draw defenses away from primary targets. None of this appeared miraculous to those outside the system. It looked like improved planning, better pilots, stronger aircraft. Only a few knew the truth. Yet even as the Allies benefited, the Germans noticed something unsettling. Despite changes in tactics, the Allies seemed to anticipate their moves with uncanny accuracy. Defensive measures were countered quickly. Traps failed more often than they succeeded. Some German officers began to suspect a systemic problem. Meetings were held, reports were written, mathematicians reviewed Enigma's design. Each time the conclusion was the same: the machine was secure. Any compromise must come from spies or bad discipline. That conclusion sealed Enigma's fate. In 1944, preparations for the largest amphibious invasion in history reached their final stage. Tens of thousands of troops assembled in southern England, equipment piled up in ports, airfields overflowed with aircraft. If Germany discovered the invasion plans, the result would be catastrophic. Enigma intelligence became central to deception. Allied planners monitored German perceptions daily. They read messages discussing troop deployments, defensive expectations, and command assumptions. The Germans believed the main invasion would come at Pas de Calais. That belief was carefully nurtured. False radio traffic suggested a massive force poised across the narrowest part of the channel. Double agents fed convincing stories. Inflatable tanks and wooden aircraft created the illusion of an army that did not exist. Enigma carried those lies directly into German headquarters. When the real invasion came, at Normandy, the Germans hesitated. They believed it was a diversion. Hours passed, then days. Critical reserves were held back, waiting for an attack that never came. Those hours mattered. Those days decided the future of Europe. As Allied forces pushed inland, Enigma decrypts tracked German reactions, retreats, counterattacks, desperation. The fog of war lifted, at least on one side. But Enigma's influence extended beyond Europe. In the Pacific, different codes dominated, but the principles pioneered at Bletchley Park spread quickly. The idea that machines could assist in breaking machines, that computation could outpace secrecy, reshaped intelligence thinking worldwide. The war accelerated the birth of computing. After victory in Europe, Enigma traffic dwindled. German units surrendered or went silent. The once constant flow of encrypted messages slowed to a trickle. When Germany finally surrendered in May 1945, celebrations erupted across Allied nations. Streets filled with cheering crowds, flags waved, bells rang. At Bletchley Park, there was no celebration. The workers packed their things, machines were shut down, documents were sealed. Many were told never to speak of what they had done. and they obeyed. The Enigma machines themselves were locked away, studied briefly, then stored. Some were destroyed, others disappeared into archives. A few were quietly sold to countries that believed them still secure. The irony was profound. A machine that had once guarded the secrets of a global empire became surplus equipment. For years, the story remained hidden. Textbooks credited battles, generals, and weapons. The silent war of signals remained classified, its heroes anonymous. Only in the 1970s did the truth begin to emerge. Former codebreakers, now elderly, spoke publicly for the first time. Historians gained access to records. The scale of Enigma's impact became undeniable. The stolen Enigma machine from occupied Poland, once a desperate gamble, was recognized as one of the most important intelligence coups in history. Without it, Enigma might still have been broken eventually, but not in time, not when it mattered most. Estimates suggested the war in Europe was shortened by up to 2 years. 2 years, measured in millions of lives. Soldiers that never fought, cities never bombed, families never destroyed, all because a handful of people chose to steal a box of wires and keys. The world moved on, but the legacy endured. Modern encryption, cybersecurity, and computer science all trace roots back to those early struggles against Enigma. The idea that no system is truly unbreakable, that security depends as much on people as on machines, became a guiding principle. And somewhere, in museums and archives, Enigma machines sit behind glass. Tourists press buttons. Children turn rotors. Few understand the weight of history inside that wooden box. Fewer still remember the night it was stolen.
After the guns fell silent in Europe, the world rushed forward as if desperate to forget what it had just survived. Cities rebuilt themselves from rubble. Soldiers returned home carrying memories they rarely shared. New borders were drawn, new alliances formed, and a fragile peace settled over a deeply scarred planet. But some wars do not end when the shooting stops. The War of Secrets continued. Inside locked rooms across Britain and the United States, intelligence officials reviewed mountains of documents labeled with a single word, Enigma. They debated what should be revealed and what must remain hidden. The machine itself was no longer an enemy, but the methods used to defeat it were more valuable than ever. Because a new world was emerging. Former allies were becoming rivals. Trust dissolved quickly. The Soviet Union, once a partner against Nazi Germany, was now viewed with suspicion. Communication security became the backbone of national defense. Whoever controlled information would control the future. And the lessons learned from Enigma were priceless. The first decision was silence. Governments agreed, implicitly, sometimes explicitly, that the full truth of Enigma would remain classified. If adversaries learned how thoroughly the system had been compromised, they might abandon similar technologies or improve their own encryption faster. So the story stayed buried. Bletchley Park closed its doors. Many of its buildings were demolished or repurposed. The machines were dismantled. The bombs, once the beating heart of the operation, were broken apart or destroyed. Their existence was barely acknowledged. Alan Turing returned to academic life, carrying secrets that shaped his every thought. He moved on to new problems, new machines, new ideas that would eventually form the foundation of modern computing and artificial intelligence. Yet the recognition he deserved never came in his lifetime. The silence followed him everywhere. Across Europe, the men and women of the resistance faded into history's margins. Some were honored locally, many were not. In Poland, those who had fought the Nazis now faced a new reality under Soviet influence.
Former resistance fighters were interrogated, imprisoned, or worse. The theft of the Enigma machine, one of the most important acts of the war, was never mentioned. For the families of those who died, there were no answers, only absence. Meanwhile, the Enigma machines themselves began a strange second life. Believing them still secure, surplus Enigma machines were sold or gifted to other nations. Some went to newly independent states, others to former colonies. Militaries around the world adopted them, confident in German engineering and mathematical rigor. They did not know. British and American intelligence could read those messages too. It was a quiet advantage in a chaotic post-war world, allowing Western powers to monitor conflicts, coups, and diplomatic maneuvers without firing a shot. Enigma's shadow extended far beyond World War II, shaping early Cold War intelligence in ways still not fully understood. But secrets have a lifespan. By the late 1960s, whispers began to surface. Retired officers hinted at special intelligence. Former codebreakers spoke vaguely about their wartime roles. Historians noticed inconsistencies between German expectations and Allied actions during the war. Questions multiplied. Then, slowly, the doors opened. In the 1970s, official histories were published, files were declassified, names emerged, faces appeared. The public learned for the first time that the Allies had been reading Enigma traffic for much of the war. The revelation was staggering. What had once been seen as luck, intuition, or superior strategy was reinterpreted through a new lens. Battles made sense. Decisions once criticized now appeared calculated. The scale of the intelligence advantage became undeniable. And at the center of it all stood that stolen machine. Historians traced the chain backward, from Normandy to the Atlantic, from Bletchley Park to occupied Poland. They reconstructed the mission step by step, piecing together fragments from scattered archives and fading memories. What emerged was not a story of technology alone, but of courage. A small team operating in the heart of enemy territory, no guarantee of success, no promise of survival, no expectation of recognition, only necessity. They did not know they were shortening the war. They did not know they were saving millions of lives. They only knew that the machine mattered and that someone had to take it. As museums began to display Enigma machines, visitors marveled at their complexity. Guides explained rotors and plug boards, permutations and keys. The story often ended there, framed as a triumph of mathematics over machinery. But that framing missed something essential. Enigma was not defeated by numbers alone. It was defeated by people. People who noticed patterns, people who questioned assumption, people who exploited human error, people who risked everything to steal a machine others thought untouchable. In the United States, the story resonated deeply. It fit a narrative Americans understood, the power of intelligence, innovation, and cooperation. It highlighted the importance of allies, of shared knowledge, of trust across borders. Hollywood took notice. Books were written, films were planned. Some captured the brilliance, others simplified it into neat arcs and dramatic speeches. The truth was messier, quieter, and far more human. The real heroes rarely spoke. Some, when asked late in life what they had done during the war, answered simply, office work. Others deflected with humor. A few, finally free from secrecy, spoke with a mixture of pride and grief. They remembered friends who never came back. They remembered nights when failure meant death for strangers they would never meet. They remembered the weight of knowing and not being able to act. Today, the legacy of Enigma lives on in every secure message sent across the Internet. The principles forged in that hidden war underpin modern cryptography, cybersecurity, and digital privacy. The idea that encryption must anticipate not just mathematical attack, but human behavior remains central. The stolen Enigma machine changed how the world thinks about secrecy. It proved that no system is invulnerable, that trust can be exploited, that silence can win wars, and that the most decisive battles are often fought far from the front lines. In the end, the mission to steal Hitler's code machine was not about a device. It was about understanding an enemy so completely that his greatest strength became his greatest weakness. The Nazis believed Enigma made them invisible. Instead, it revealed them, message by message, key by key, until the war itself could no longer be hidden.
As the Cold War tightened its grip on the world, the legacy of Enigma quietly reshaped a new battlefield, one without trenches or front lines, but no less dangerous. Information became the new weapon, secrecy the new armor. Nations raced not just to build bombs, but to hide intentions, movements, and fears behind layers of code. The lessons learned from stealing Hitler's code machine became doctrine. In Washington and London, intelligence agencies reorganized themselves around signals intelligence. What had once been an improvised wartime effort hardened into permanent institutions. Budgets expanded, recruitment intensified. Mathematicians, linguists, engineers, and analysts replaced soldiers as the first line of defense. And always, hovering over their work, was the ghost of Enigma. The belief that a perfect cipher could exist had died in occupied Poland. In its place grew a harsher truth. Every system could be broken, not always by force, not always by brilliance, but by patience, cooperation, and human error. This understanding shaped how the United States approached global power. During the early Cold War years, intercepted communications influenced decisions in Korea, Berlin, and Cuba. Though different codes were used, the philosophy was the same: break the message, understand the enemy, act without revealing how much you know. It was a dangerous game. One misstep could expose capabilities painstakingly built over years. One public success could force an adversary to change systems overnight. Intelligence victories had to remain invisible to be effective. That paradox was born with Enigma. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the memory of World War II settled unevenly. Veterans aged, survivors passed stories down through families, yet the secret war remained absent from public consciousness. Children learned about D-Day, Stalingrad, and Hiroshima. They did not learn about keys, rotors, or bombs. At Bletchley Park, weeds grew where machines once roared. Buildings decayed. The site nearly vanished into obscurity, its importance not recognized even by those living nearby. It took determination from former codebreakers and historians to preserve it. They understood that without memory, the lesson would be lost, that future generations might again believe in unbreakable systems. When Bletchley Park finally became a museum, visitors walked through reconstructed huts, listening to recorded stories from those who had once worked there. Many were shocked by how ordinary everything looked. No grand halls, no heroic statues, just desks, chairs, paper. That ordinariness was the point. The mission to steal the Enigma machine had not relied on superhumans. It relied on people willing to act when logic said they should not, on trust between allies who spoke different languages and lived under different flags, on courage exercised quietly, without witnesses. The Polish role, long minimized by politics, slowly regained recognition.
Historians acknowledged that without early Polish breakthroughs and without the theft from occupied territory, the later successes at Bletchley Park might never have happened in time. The story became global. In classrooms, universities, and military academies, Enigma was studied not just as a cipher, but as a case study in systems failure. Analysts examined how German overconfidence blinded them, how bureaucratic inertia preserved a flawed assumption, how authority dismissed inconvenient warnings. These lessons applied far beyond warfare. They influenced economics, cybersecurity, engineering, and even organizational leadership. The idea that complexity alone guarantees safety was exposed as a dangerous myth. Yet perhaps the most profound legacy was philosophical. The Enigma story challenged how societies think about heroism. There were no triumphant charges, no flags raised under fire. The heroes typed, calculated, waited, and sometimes chose not to act. They accepted moral ambiguity in service of a greater goal. That kind of heroism is uncomfortable. It offers no clean victories, only outcomes. In the United States, this resonated strongly in the post-9/11 world, where intelligence once again moved to the forefront of national security. Debates about surveillance, privacy, and encryption echoed questions first confronted during World War II. How much secrecy is necessary? How much knowledge is too much? Who decides? The answers were never simple. Even now, digital encryption traces its lineage to Enigma's defeat. Modern algorithms are stronger, faster, more complex, but the principles remain the same. Security depends not only on mathematics, but on implementation, on discipline, on people. Every password reused, every shortcut taken, every assumption left unchallenged. These are the new rotors turning quietly in the background. Looking back, the mission to steal Hitler's code machine stands as a turning point, not just in a war, but in human understanding. It marked the moment when information overtook firepower as the decisive force in global conflict. That shift defines the modern world, and it began with a small group of people who understood that the most powerful weapon of their time was not a gun, but a secret. They moved through darkness so others could live in light. They vanished into history so history itself could change. Their reward was silence, but their impact was permanent.
As decades passed, the story of Enigma transformed from classified intelligence into something larger, almost mythic. What began as a wartime necessity became a lens through which humanity examined its relationship with technology, secrecy, and power. The men and women who had lived inside that secret rarely recognized themselves in the versions that later emerged. The truth was quieter than legend, less dramatic than fiction, and yet far more consequential. Many of the surviving codebreakers lived ordinary lives afterward. They became teachers, engineers, clerks, parents, grandparents. For years they carried memories they could not share, of nights spent staring at impossible problems, of relief when a solution arrived, of dread when it did not. Some remembered specific moments vividly, the exact second a bomb stopped spinning, the sound of paper being torn from a printer, the look exchanged between two people who understood, without words, that lives had just been saved or lost. Those memories never left. In Poland, the reckoning came later and more painfully. The country that had produced some of the earliest Enigma breakthroughs found itself overshadowed by post-war politics. Credit was slow to arrive, recognition slower still. But history has a way of resurfacing truths. Polish mathematicians Marian Rejewski, Jerzy Różycki, and Henryk Zygalski were finally acknowledged for laying the groundwork that made everything else possible. Without their insights, without their willingness to share knowledge on the brink of invasion, the story might have ended very differently.
Their work was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, cooperation can outlive catastrophe. In the United States, Enigma's story found a receptive audience. Americans, long fascinated by innovation and problem-solving, saw in it a reflection of their own values. It reinforced a belief that intellect, teamwork, and persistence could overcome even the most daunting challenges. But it also carried a warning. Technology alone is never enough. The Germans had superior engineering, they had discipline, they had confidence. What they lacked was humility, the willingness to question their own assumptions. That failure cost them everything. As the digital age accelerated, the parallels became impossible to ignore. Computers grew smaller and more powerful. Communication became instantaneous. Encryption shifted from military institutions to everyday life, banking, commerce, personal messaging. Suddenly, everyone was using systems once reserved for governments, and suddenly, the lessons of Enigma mattered to everyone. Cybersecurity experts cited Enigma as a foundational case study, not because it was weak, but because it demonstrated how strength can breed complacency, how users, not designers, often determine security outcomes, how attackers rarely need to break systems outright, they only need to find the cracks. Those cracks are always human. The mission to steal Hitler's code machine illustrated this perfectly. The machine itself was formidable, but it depended on storage facilities, guards, procedures, and assumptions. It depended on people believing that no one would dare attempt the impossible. Someone did. That willingness to attempt what others dismiss is what defines progress. Museums around the world now display Enigma machines as artifacts of a bygone era. Visitors turn the keys, watch the rotors spin, and marvel at the elegance of the design. Many leave impressed, few leave unsettled, yet they should, because Enigma is not just a story about the past, it is a mirror held up to the present. Every system we trust blindly, every technology we assume is secure, every secret we believe is safe. The men who stole the machine understood something timeless. Security is not a state, it is a process, one that demands constant vigilance, skepticism, and adaptation. When that vigilance fades, history repeats itself. In classrooms, educators use Enigma to teach critical thinking. Students learn how assumptions shape outcomes, how interdisciplinary collaboration solves problems, how ethics complicate decisions. They debate whether the secrecy was justified, whether the sacrifices were necessary. There are no easy answers. That complexity is part of the legacy. As the last witnesses passed away, recordings preserved their voices. In interviews, many downplayed their roles. They spoke of teamwork, of being in the right place at the right time, of doing what needed to be done. Rarely did they speak of fear, but fear was always there. Fear of failure, fear of discovery, fear that even success might come too late. That fear did not stop them, it sharpened them. Looking back now, it becomes clear that the mission to steal Hitler's code machine was not a single event, but a convergence of mathematics and courage, of planning and chance, of individuals and institutions. Remove any one element and the outcome changes. That fragility is what makes the story powerful. History often feels inevitable in hindsight. Enigma reminds us that it is not, that it turns on decisions made by ordinary people under extraordinary pressure. In a dark forest, in a quiet room, in silence. And so the story endures, not as a tale of a machine defeated, but as proof that understanding an enemy is more powerful than destroying him. That knowledge can outlive violence, that secrets once exposed can reshape the world, and that sometimes the most important victories leave no visible scars, only a different future.
As the story of Enigma settled into history,
one truth became increasingly clear. Its greatest impact was not confined to the years of World War II. It reshaped how humanity understood power itself. Before Enigma, power was visible. It marched in columns, roared in engines, exploded in fire. After Enigma, power became subtle. It whispered. It hid behind numbers and logic. It moved without leaving footprints. This transformation altered the course of global leadership. The United States emerged from the war not only as a military superpower, but as an intelligence superpower. The infrastructure built to defeat Enigma became the foundation for a permanent signals intelligence apparatus. The mindset forged at Bletchley Park crossed the Atlantic and embedded itself into American institutions. From that point forward, wars would rarely be fought blind. Information dominance became doctrine. Yet the moral weight of that dominance never disappeared. Veterans of the secret war understood something policymakers often struggled with. Knowing everything does not make decisions easier. Sometimes it makes them harder. Because knowledge creates responsibility. To know an attack is coming and not stop it is a burden few can carry. To know how an enemy thinks is to confront the limits of control. Intelligence does not eliminate tragedy, it merely reshapes it. Those lessons echoed across generations. During later conflicts, analysts often referenced Enigma indirectly. They spoke of strategic patience, of protecting sources and methods, of long-term advantage over short-term gain. These phrases traced their lineage back to a time when secrecy itself had won a war. The individuals who made that victory possible remained largely invisible. Even as museums expanded exhibits and books filled shelves, the core of the story resisted simplification. There was no single hero, no single moment, no dramatic revelation that ended everything. Instead, there was accumulation, small successes layered over time, tiny advantages exploited relentlessly, human errors observed, remembered, and used. The mission to steal Hitler's code machine embodied that philosophy perfectly. It was not flashy, it was not loud, it did not rely on overwhelming force. It relied on understanding systems well enough to know where they could be touched without triggering collapse. That insight remains relevant in every era. In the digital age, societies wrestle with encryption debates that mirror Enigma-era dilemmas. Governments argue for access in the name of security. Citizens argue for privacy in the name of freedom. Both sides invoke history. Few realize how deeply Enigma shaped those arguments. The machine proved that encryption could protect, but also that it could deceive its users into false confidence. It showed that secrecy without adaptability is a liability, that trust without verification invites disaster. Perhaps the most enduring legacy of Enigma is humility. The Germans believed their machine was perfect. It was not. The Allies believed breaking it would guarantee victory. It did not, at least not alone. Victory came from integration, intelligence paired with industry, knowledge paired with sacrifice, machines paired with human judgment. Strip anyone away, and the outcome changes. That interdependence defines modern civilization. Looking back, historians often ask a single question. What if the mission had failed? What if the Enigma machines had been destroyed before capture? What if the resistance network had been compromised earlier? What if the stolen crates had never reached Britain? The answers are unsettling. The war would have lasted longer. Millions more might have died. Europe might have emerged divided differently, or not at all. History balanced on a narrow edge, and most people never knew. That is the paradox of Enigma. Its success required invisibility. Its triumph demanded anonymity. The better it worked, the less anyone noticed. Even today, many people know the name Enigma without understanding its true significance. They see it as a puzzle, a curiosity, a relic. It was none of those things. It was a turning point. The moment humanity learned that information could be weaponized at scale, and that understanding systems was more powerful than destroying them. The men who stole the Hitler code machine embodied that philosophy perfectly. It was not flashy, it was not loud, it did not rely on overwhelming force. It relied on understanding systems well enough to know where they could be touched without triggering collapse. That insight remains relevant in every era. In the digital age, societies wrestle with encryption debates that mirror Enigma-era dilemmas. Governments argue for access in the name of security. Citizens argue for privacy in the name of freedom. Both sides invoke history. Few realize how deeply Enigma shaped those arguments. The machine proved that encryption could protect, but also that it could deceive its users into false confidence. It showed that secrecy without adaptability is a liability, that trust without verification invites disaster. Perhaps the most enduring legacy of Enigma is humility. The Germans believed their machine was perfect. It was not. The Allies believed breaking it would guarantee victory. It did not, at least not alone. Victory came from integration, intelligence paired with industry, knowledge paired with sacrifice, machines paired with human judgment. Strip anyone away, and the outcome changes. That interdependence defines modern civilization. Looking back, historians often ask a single question. What if the mission had failed? What if the Enigma machines had been destroyed before capture? What if the resistance network had been compromised earlier? What if the stolen crates had never reached Britain? The answers are unsettling. The war would have lasted longer. Millions more might have died. Europe might have emerged divided differently, or not at all. History balanced on a narrow edge, and most people never knew. That is the paradox of Enigma. Its success required invisibility. Its triumph demanded anonymity. The better it worked, the less anyone noticed. Even today, many people know the name Enigma without understanding its true significance. They see it as a puzzle, a curiosity, a relic. It was none of those things. It was a turning point. The moment humanity learned that information could be weaponized at scale, and that understanding systems was more powerful than destroying them. The men who stole the Hitler code machine embodied that philosophy perfectly. It was not flashy, it was not loud, it did not rely on overwhelming force. It relied on understanding systems well enough to know where they could be touched without triggering collapse. That insight remains relevant in every era. In the digital age, societies wrestle with encryption debates that mirror Enigma-era dilemmas. Governments argue for access in the name of security. Citizens argue for privacy in the name of freedom. Both sides invoke history. Few realize how deeply Enigma shaped those arguments. The machine proved that encryption could protect, but also that it could deceive its users into false confidence. It showed that secrecy without adaptability is a liability, that trust without verification invites disaster. Perhaps the most enduring legacy of Enigma is humility. The Germans believed their machine was perfect. It was not. The Allies believed breaking it would guarantee victory. It did not, at least not alone. Victory came from integration, intelligence paired with industry, knowledge paired with sacrifice, machines paired with human judgment. Strip anyone away, and the outcome changes. That interdependence defines modern civilization. Looking back, historians often ask a single question. What if the mission had failed? What if the Enigma machines had been destroyed before capture? What if the resistance network had been compromised earlier? What if the stolen crates had never reached Britain? The answers are unsettling. the war would have lasted longer. Millions more might have died. Europe might have emerged divided differently, or not at all. History balanced on a narrow edge, and most people never knew. That is the paradox of Enigma. Its success required invisibility. Its triumph demanded anonymity. The better it worked, the less anyone noticed. Even today, many people know the name Enigma without understanding its true significance. They see it as a puzzle, a curiosity, a relic. It was none of those things. It was a turning point. The moment humanity learned that information could be weaponized at scale, and that understanding systems was more powerful than destroying them. The men who stole the Hitler code machine
did not set out to change the world. They set out to survive, to resist, to do what little they could in impossible circumstances. That their actions reshaped history is almost accidental. Almost. In the end, the secret mission to steal Hitler's code machine stands as a reminder that history is not always shaped by the loudest events. Sometimes it is shaped by silence, by patience, by people willing to act without recognition. People who understood that the future was hidden in plain sight, inside a wooden box wired with rotors, protected by arrogance. And once that arrogance was pierced, nothing was ever the same again. The war ended, the machines fell silent, but the world they created never did. In the end, the world moved forward, unaware of how close it had come to a very different future. Cities rebuilt themselves atop layers of forgotten secrets. Children grew up free from occupations they never knew. Borders hardened, alliances shifted, and new fears replaced old ones. History marched on, carrying with it the illusion that outcomes had always been inevitable. But inevitability is a story we tell ourselves after the fact. The truth is far more fragile. Somewhere in occupied Europe, years earlier, a handful of people had chosen to act when the odds said they should not. They had stepped into darkness, knowing there would be no applause waiting on the other side. They carried with them no certainty, only the belief that a machine mattered enough to risk everything. That belief was correct. The stolen Enigma machine did not fire a single bullet. It did not liberate a city or capture a flag, yet it reached further than any weapon of its time. It bent the trajectory of armies, shortened battles before they began, and spared lives that would never know they were saved. Its power lay not in what it was, but in what it revealed. It revealed that secrecy is never absolute, that complexity can deceive its creators, that systems built by humans always carry human weaknesses inside them. And most of all, it revealed that intelligence, true intelligence, is not about domination, but understanding. Understanding how an enemy thinks, understanding how people behave under pressure, understanding when to act and when not to. The men and women of the secret war lived with those decisions for the rest of their lives. Some questioned them, some defended them, all were shaped by them. Their silence was not weakness, it was discipline. They understood that some victories lose their value when exposed. For decades, the story slept inside archives, waiting for a world mature enough to hear it. When it finally emerged, it did so not as a tale of triumph, but as a lesson, a warning wrapped in history. Because the world Enigma helped create is still with us. Every encrypted message sent today, every secure transaction, every private conversation exists in the shadow of that wooden box with its spinning rotors. Modern systems are faster, stronger, more elegant, but they face the same fundamental challenge. They are built by people, and people are predictable. The secret mission to steal Hitler's code machine reminds us that progress does not belong exclusively to the powerful. It belongs to the observant, to the patient, to those willing to question what others accept as permanent.
It belongs to those who understand that the most dangerous phrase in any language is, "This cannot be broken." History proved otherwise. The Nazis trusted Enigma completely, and that trust became their undoing. The Allies trusted cooperation, shared knowledge, and relentless curiosity, and that trust reshaped the modern world. No monument marks the night the machine was stolen. No holiday commemorates the moment its secrets were unlocked. There is no parade for the courage that unfolded in silence. Yet its impact surrounds us. In the way wars are planned, in the way governments communicate, in the way societies argue about privacy, security, and freedom. The echoes of that mission are still being felt. And perhaps that is the final lesson, that the most important battles are not always the ones we remember, that the future can be changed quietly by people whose names history almost forgets, that sometimes the fate of the world turns not on who fires first, but on who listens best. The war was won, the machines were dismantled, the secrets were buried, but the truth endured. And it began with a single decision: to steal a machine everyone believed was untouchable. Unlock history's greatest secret. Subscribe now and follow to witness the untold story of Hitler's Enigma machine.